So hello everybody again. I'm Neil Maiden. I'm here in the Cass Business School, and since I have a title of Digital Creativity, I'm going to talk to you about creativity with digital. And I guess what this talk is really about is the presentation of an early research prototype we've been developing with our own Department of Journalism here at City to help journalists be more creative, or if you're a journalist and I've just offended you, to make you as creative but more productively. That's the essence of the idea. The tool is called JUICE. It stands for the Journalist Creativity Engine. It's one of our more contrived acronyms, but it's good. And it's funded, it's undertaken very much particularly with George Brock, who used to be on the senior editorial team at both the Times and the Guardian. And these are the guys that really make it happen, James and Cos, who are the designers and developers. I just get to stand here and wave my arms around and say how great it is. So what I'm going to try and do in about what looks like 20 minutes, based on what you gave before, is that right? 20 minutes, all right, is to talk about the issue in journalism and why people would consider that we need more effective digital support for journalists to be creative. You could argue that in some cases they're already creative enough. I'll talk then about a principle of human-centered creative cognition that underpins the design of this and other tools that we've developed. And then I'll sort of burst into the JUICE tool and try and give you a live demo, assuming that the internet has actually properly reconnected to my machine during the reboot. And then I'll talk about a little bit of future development. This work and the follow-on work are funded by 2 Google grants. This one is from something called a Computational Journalism in Europe Awards that we won last year. So what's the challenge here? Journalism is one of the creative industries. So why do we need digital support to try and enhance creativity in the creative industries? One of the real issues is that most people are now aware that there are diminishing financial returns for newspapers and news organisations. People no longer have to pay to get news. And therefore, many newsrooms, many independent journalists and freelancers are working with a smaller return on resource. Now that said, there is increasing interest in creative work, certainly digital work. You only have to look at the whole aspect of investigative journalism, WikiLeaks and so on, to see that the role of creativity and digital are somehow there in searches for patterns and correlations and so on. However, in most newsrooms, there is increasing financial pressures, reducing staff numbers, fewer journalists around, which is reinforced by problems of traditional work practices and people refusing to change or not willing to change because they're afraid of losing their work. And where there are evidence in newsrooms of journalists trying to develop more creative strategies in early story development and discovering themes, they're often impeded by the day-to-day work pressures of having to work more hard, quicker, under shorter turnaround times. So we started to look, with this award, how we could introduce digital technologies that will work with the journalists and help them to be creative in early story development. So let me just give you a working definition here of creativity that we use to underpin a lot of our work. It comes from a couple of psychologists, Sternberg and Lovett, and they say creativity is the ability to produce work that is both novel and appropriate or useful. So it's not just wacky, it's about coming up with something that's new or novel with respect to some sort of prototypical example, and it still meets a particular need. So you can take that definition and specialise it to early journalism work and say, in the context of journalism, it's about coming up with useful news contributions that I think are adding value to societal debate, political debate and so on, that are either new to the journalist and or new to the reader. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to help the journalists come up with new angles on news stories that in turn will be new and useful for their readers. So how did we do that? Well, we did what we often do and reinterpret creative problem solving as a degree of search. And in particular, we borrow this notion of human-centered creative cognition from Andrew Cohen, which sees creativity as a process of information search and idea discovery. The process of idea generation happens in conjunction with search or idea finding. So traditional Google and other search tools are focused on the information finding, but they're not manipulating what you do with that information to come up with ideas. To give you a very domestic example, whenever I'm required to come up with a dinner plan when we're having guests and my wife thinks I should be doing the cooking, she'll say, "What are you going to cook?" I'm really rubbish at remembering what I've cooked and liked. So what I have to do is I have to go into the kitchen, grumble, pull out cookbooks, and sort of start flicking through. I'm in the process of information finding. That gives me ideas. I go, oh, that's interesting. I haven't had that spinach and cream thing for ages. And I start thinking, so I've got idea generation from the finding. That then reframes my search. I go and look in another book at fish dishes that might go with it at that time of year. So I'm constantly in this process of interleaving idea generation and idea finding. And as I find things, that reframes my search. I change my goal and start searching again. So that's the essence of what a lot of our tools do. Now the beauty is that computer science has been successful in a number of ways. One of those is search and information finding. It's done less on idea generation, but it's very effective at idea discovery. So what we've done is start to work with adapting these kinds of search engines to do creative search. So it's not about finding exactly what you're looking for, it's about finding something that's sort of the same but different, something that's in the creative grey zone that will give you ideas. You may ask for X and Y, we'll give you X, Y and Z, and the Z is the novel angle that you hadn't thought of, and then you'll reframe your search and ask for A and B, and we'll give you A, B and C. Now we're not the first people to do this. Andrew Kern at the University of Austin in Texas did this at least 10 years ago with a tool called Combin Formation that worked on top of existing search tools, but it would extract the content of the web pages found to create those dynamic visual mosaics. So here he is searching around something to do with stem cells, and you're finding text and images being extracted from the search pages. And not only is that giving you results, this thing is moving dynamically by linking similar things together, and you can stop the search and drag things into what's called the cool space in the middle, and that will automatically redefine your search. So it's giving you ideas based on the top of Google and Yahoo. So we exploit that aspect. The other interesting thing about a lot of creative work is that a lot of things that are creative, i.e. novel, actually share the same qualities. This has been shown in the TRIZ methodology and work in IT, that typically something that is a creative outcome typically has one or more qualities that reoccur in lots of other creative things. So in work that's been done by Corentin Bournet in his PhD or post-PhD work is durability is a quality of creative digital outputs, and there are other qualities like that. So what we try and do within this space is to undertake search that creates things that are similar to different to what you've said you want, to help you think more creatively about the problem, and then say, take that thing and specialize it with a particular quality. And we've applied this in a number of domains, in dementia care, in design, in manufacturing, and now, since last October, in journalism. So you're going, so what? Surely the newsrooms have invested in stuff like this? Well, not very much. In fact, very little at all from what we can find. Most journalists are working in general purpose software tools. Much of what they write is in Google Docs or Word before it gets moved to content management systems. They may be using existing terms, referencing tools like EndNote and so on. They may be using general search terms like Google. I really should replace that example. And certainly now, and they're using some simple multimedia search tools where you can browse different social media streams at the same time in simple presentations. So you may be pulling up Twitter feeds and LinkedIn pages at the same time based on the same search. Simple stuff. So we spotted a gap and started speaking with a lot of leading edge journalism newsrooms to come up with the concept of JUICE. So I'm going quite quickly here to try and give you as much time for a demo. So what JUICE does is it does creative search of trusted news sources, which are almost 500 news websites that we've identified and collaborate with the BBC on, as well as live Twitter feeds. And we search using a set of predefined creative search strategies that are specialised to journalism, and I'll talk about those in a minute. We do everything on top of natural language. Journalists are writing in natural language, so we are extracting natural language, we are forming the queries, the creative search queries out of natural language, and we're presenting the results back in natural language. So you don't need to tag or formalise or structure anything. You'll see this in a minute. And we're trying to deliver a degree of what is called pain-free interaction. Digital support for creative thinking needs to be what is called pain-free. If there's any kind of interaction, if you see the interface, it's going to stop your creative flow. So it needs to be as invisible as possible. And we do that to enable exploration of information quickly, to associate ideas and experiment with concepts. So we talked to a lot of journalism organisations, and one of the tools that they work with quite a lot was Google Docs. And we went, we have Google funding. And Google Docs has this lovely feature of an add-on. You can add features into your default Google Docs tool. So we've essentially built Juice as an add-on sidebar. It's a sidebar that will appear at the side of your work tool to give you creative support. Sort of, if for some reason the internet doesn't work or my tool fails for the first time in a live demo, that's what it would have looked like, okay? So you can see the sidebar with a dialog box on the top of what you're writing. So the interesting question then comes, what do we search for? Now the good news is through George Brock in the Department of Journalism, we had access to quite a lot of journalists, very experienced ones. So we said, so when you've got to write, you've got to come up with a creative angle on a story. What do you look for? And they kind of looked at us quite blankly for a while, using the knowledge elicitation expertise. But eventually they got what we were looking for. So we sought descriptions, and then detailed descriptions of how journalists, experienced ones, generate creative angles on stories that might have already been explored quite extensively by themselves and colleagues. And we've identified 6 strategies that tend to come up quite a lot. Try and come up with an individual perspective, a human dimension. Try and look up for the quantifiable elements of a story, the measurable evidence underpinning it. Look for the causes for the story. What's the causal background for the EU migration crisis? It goes back a long way. A particularly British angle here, something that's quirky, funny and humorous. Try codifying that in software. Ramifications, future consequences of news stories, as well as an increasing focus on interactive data visualizations that you try and pull out to embellish your story with. Now, at the time, we only had a grant that was running for 5 or 6 months, so in the first prototype, we have got follow-on money, but in this first prototype, and I'm going to show you, my God, is that 20 minutes?
No, it's 10.
Oh, that's all right. Don't do that to me, Mary. We just focused on the first one. So what I'm going to show you, is a version of the tool that's running creative search to give you individual dimensions or people that you might write stories about. Before I do that, I just want to give those of you who are a little bit more technically minded an understanding of how this works, how you're able to go for some text in your editor browser in Google Docs to creative advice about individual stories that you might want to write about in the Juice sidebar. So the first thing we do is apply a set of reasonably sophisticated natural language parsers to the sentences to work out what are the nouns, what are the verbs, what are the adjectives, what are the adverbs, and stem them so we just get the roots, so we get rid of the plurals and things like this. What we then do is use concepts such as, and tools such as WordNet and VerbNet to disambiguate what each of those words means, to come up with the most likely meaning of each word using 6 extremely sophisticated algorithms. The beauty of the English language, as well as its weakness, is the amount of synonyms and terms. So what we are then trying to do is automatically work out the most likely meaning of a word. So a driver, to a lot of people, somebody who drives a car. If you're a golfer, it's also a number 1 would. It's also possibly someone who drives animals such as sheep across fields or bridges and things like this. So there are multiple meanings. Your tool has to work out, every time it encounters a word, what is the most likely meaning. Once we've inferred the most likely meaning, we then undertake what is called sense-based query expansion. We expand the query with those terms, with other terms that have similar meanings, based on the different kinds of creative search. So we will add terms to our query depending on what kinds of other things we want to find. So if we want to find more general examples, we'll come up with more general terms for the same terms that look for things that are more broad. If we want to narrow down, we'll come up with terms that are more specific. So the queries are literally hundreds of terms long. You cannot use traditional SQL queries for this. So we end up with very large queries, and then we file them at trusted news services, Twitter services, and Wikipedia. And for this strategy, what we then do is connect to a tool from the BBC News Labs called Juice. I have to get it right. Ours is called Juice, and by complete coincidence, theirs is called Juicer. It's all very rooty. I know. You can take 2 minutes off me for that, all right? So anyway, what that engine does, it's a single search point that will search almost 500 certified news websites. So we don't have to target these 500 websites, they do it for us. So we're immediately searching 500 websites, as well as Twitter, for relevant news stories based on those queries. And what we then do with the individual angle that we're talking about, the individual strategy, is we cross-reference all the names of the people against the names in Wikipedia. And basically we're extracting the names of people in the stories who are in Wikipedia and suggesting those as creative angles for you to search. Sounds complicated? It is. It makes me nervous every time I run the tool. So to give you an idea of how this works, with a simple example, before we go into something that's interactive, an example I came up with around about Christmas was a simple sentence here: storm disrupts power supplies. We had storms in the UK. So the parsers extract the storm, the noun, storm. Then in term disambiguation, this is not so much another kind of storm, it's simply a violent weather condition as opposed to an attack or something like that. We then expand this violent weather condition noun with weather turbine information, or we might add a surprising or humorous element to come up with stories such as bad weather increasing electricity production because there's more wind, or for example, story where individuals have their Christmases saved because of the wind turbines to enable them to have power to cook the meal when the electricity went out. So you get a sense of how you expand from those stories. And then that gives you the advice in the sidebar. So at this point, you're ready for a demo? Yeah. Damn, I was hoping to say, don't bother, Neil, we believe you. Oh, here we go. This is where I have to trust the wireless network here. Okay, let me make that a little bit bigger. So here I am, and it's the story of the age. I know we're all sick of it. It's been sleepless nights, this. But anyway, we're writing something about Brexit, and I've got half an hour, typical deadline, and I've been asked to come up with creative angles. So the first thing I do is, well, let's kick on Juice. So Juice will be delivered when it's commercially available as a simple add-on from the Google Add-ons library. And by pressing that option, I then get the sidebar. So the rather boring-looking Juice sidebar now appears on the right-hand side. What I can then do is simply select a sentence or whatever I want to do and insert that into the Juice sidebar. So what's happening here is the parsing and the word sense disambiguation and the query expansion. So based on what I've written here, the tool has parsed and extracted terms like referendum, parliament, government, hold, commit. But what you can't see behind that is also worked out the most likely meaning in the online lexicon of the English language and expanded terms with similar meanings based on the creative search we want to run. So behind Parliament, it may also have terms like Congress and Senate if it's going to find stuff in the US or Canada or something like this. So there's a lot more information behind this. And then all I have to do is press search. Now while it's searching, it's doing quite a lot of searching, so it gives you some generic role to think about. So whilst the tool's searching, it says, could you think about angles related to photographers or television pundits or social planners? Could you think of these generic roles? We have about 100 of these roles, and the tool just generates 3 each time. So this is where I have to wait. It's normally come back by now. This is where I am hostage to the internet here.
Can you tell something's happening? Do you have a
Yeah. You can see it says searching.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. So it's come back with named individuals. So unlike Google, which gives you the primary headline is the news page, what it's doing is coming back with names of individual angles. So let me just see if any of these surprise you with the story. Do they give you a direction towards a news story? Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister. Warren Ench, I'm not sure who he is, so let's have a quick look. He is an Australian politician. Interesting, you might want to follow that up. Sir Joyal, I think, is a Canadian politician. You've got Yanis Varoufakis. Dear old Ed, Alexis Tsipras. Am I running out of time now?
You've got 2 minutes.
All right. Peter Mandelson, other people, Jeremy Corbyn, Elizabeth II. God bless Her Majesty on a day like today. You know, she's in there because of the Michael Gove stories in The Sun. So could you sort of explore that angle? Donald Rumsfeld, there's an interesting angle. The Dalai Lama is coming up. Is there a sort of peacenik refugee or a peacenik angle to this, perhaps, around the Dalai Lama? And it suggests people like that. If I go back to the top, I can just reset, choose a different part, and we focus more on the bit around the pledge that was in the Conservative Manifesto. And we will probably get other kinds. Oh, I didn't do the right piece. Damn, should have picked the wrong piece. Oh, never mind. I'll skip this now because I'm going to run out of time. So the tool is there. It enables you...
You've got a bit of time.
No, don't worry.
Don't be disempowered.
So the tool enables you to specialise your searches. You can ask for stuff that was only published in the last 48 hours. You can do expansive queries, you can do narrow queries, and eventually we'll start to add the other creative strategies. So what we've done so far is do some initial formative testing of whether this works. So we've taken master's students and asked them to write novel news stories with creative angles in 30 minutes. So this apparently, according to my colleagues in journalism, is not unrealistic. You're working for the independent newspaper, the editor wants a 300-400 word piece that revisits the Greek migrant crisis story that broke in spring 2015. The story should feature unusual angles based on individuals associated with the crisis. That's hard to do. Students were able to do this using the JUICE tool. The results suggested that most people use JUICE to come up with the creative angles, but then they would go back into their more familiar search tools, such as Google, to flesh out the story. So what I showed you was good for idea generation. It was less effective for the subsequent writing of the story. It's fine by me, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Some of the stories that we got, everyday heroes. So actually, you saw those little cues, the generic ones. One of them is Nobel Prize winners. This journalist thought, that's interesting. What happens if he's not a Nobel Prize winner? So that person ended up writing stories about all the everyday heroes on the Greek islands who are saving people from drowning, who you don't normally hear about in the press. A second angle was quite interesting. People smugglers who frame smuggling as God's work. They justify it to their clients and everybody else by doing God's work because these people want to cross the sea. Sort of Moses thing. That was triggered. I've forgotten which individual this was triggered by, but it's a story that the people wrote. A Syrian refugee family's missing cat was another one that came out, arising from the creative prompts from the stories. So we've got the tool to this point. What we're doing at the moment is refining the first creative search algorithm that we've got, and I've almost finished developing the second one, which is to look for quantifiable information. We've got quite a sophisticated algorithm that looks for numbers and quantifiable data in news stories, and we'll give that in the sidebar that you see on the right-hand side. Clearly, this is quite a sophisticated challenge and an introduction into a work task. So what we're also doing is starting to set up some larger-scale lead user communities with both professional journalists and student journalists to give us feedback. And what we're aiming to do by about September is undertake quite a large experimental summative evaluation to see whether people, one condition where they have JUICE and Google, and the other condition where they just have Google, whether they write more novel, creative stories with JUICE than without JUICE based on blind expert judgment. We have the same problem as whoever is going to ask that question to me that they asked to Alwyn. So we use expert judgment. And in future development, we agreed last week for the humour angle, which is a tricky one. We've gained access to a digital database of 30,000 political cartoons that is developed by an organisation in the Netherlands, which develops really quickly. Apparently they have cartoons being generated within 2 hours of the Brussels attacks. Whether you consider that to be morbid or not, it is the nature of journalism. And so we are currently working out how we can link to the tags of those digital cartoons, and we're going to present them as thumbnails with captions in the sidebar if you happen to choose the humour angle to give you creative insights. And interestingly, we've got to work out a pay model there because the cartoonists get paid every time their cartoon is used in a paper article. What happens if it's just being used as a source of inspiration? Maybe a lower fee, but actually we think there's a business model there to justify people donating these cartoons for that purpose. You haven't stopped me?
No, you're done.
Am I? I am done. All right, well, stop them. So there we go.